taking a look at deliberate practice. If I just interpret every day, am I doing a deliberate practice?
Not necessarily.
Right, not necessarily. Why not necessarily? I could be.
You could be, but you're only doing it if, one, it's, you know, it has to be an optimal length of time. You have to be clear on your goals. You shouldn't be like beating yourself. You should be like picking one aspect of it to work at a time.
Okay,
So
so if I'm working on a normal day, of course I'm getting some practice, and it's a good thing, and I stay fit, I stay well up on my skills to some extent. But in deliberate practice, what you do is you zero in on your weak points, and you devise exercises to work on those weak points. And in order to zero in, you need to do the kind of practice that we're doing today. So the components of deliberate practice are, first of all, focus. You're focusing on something that is specific. You will probably take a look at, for example, in interpreting, it might be how well you understand the language, how well you are really listening while you take notes, whether your notes are legible, etc. So you have a focus, and then you choke it into parts, and you devise exercises, like I was saying. So the basketball player, there was actually I didn't cover that part. It's kind of fun. The basketball player is, you got basketball player A and player B. Player A shoots. So when we have these two basketball players, one of them is shooting 200 practice shots, and the other one shoots 50. Player A is shooting 200. Player B only shoots 50, dribbles the ball a little bit leisurely, takes a break, and talks to her friends. Whereas player A has a colleague there, catching the ball each time and writing down how many times she missed and how many times she made it, how many times it shot too far to the left, how many times it went too far to the right, too long or too short. And all of this is being monitored, so she's getting measurements, she's getting monitoring, she's getting feedback. And after the game, player A takes a look at all these statistics and realizes, okay, I'm shooting a little bit off to the left, so I'm going to start correcting that. I hope next time it'll be more even between left and right, etc. And she will start being focused on what was wrong and how to fix it, and devise exercises in order to fix it. So when we're talking about interpreting, that would be, for example, I don't feel like I really understand the source language very well, or I don't understand this technical language very well. So I'm going to focus on the things that I think might not be going well. And in this case, it would be in a practice. I will chunk it into parts and devise exercises for each part. I want to make sure, as an interpreter, that I'm doing some kind of monitoring, feedback, and measurement, just like the basketball player. I'm going to maybe record myself and have that colleague comment, and that's what we'll do today. And I'll also occasionally work with a coach or with an expert, a teacher, maybe if you're in a program. And then you will try to identify the strong and weak points, which we're going to call your challenges. And then number 5, you devise targeted exercises for each weakness. So for example, if you have a problem understanding, let's say, English when spoken with an accent from India, you will find a speech, or you will find a radio station or something in India, and you'll just listen to it all the time, and you'll try to do a few interpretations from that kind of a speech. So you'll devise targeted exercises. Here's sort of a frequency type of thing. If you have a coach or a teacher, you might work with that person once or twice a month. If you have a colleague, hopefully you can meet up once or twice a week. And then by yourself, maybe you'll do an hour or 2 a day, depending on how much work you have. But in these days, there's practically no work, at least for me. So you'll have plenty of times to work on that. So the whole idea is to see where are my challenge areas. So could it be the source language, as I was saying? Am I listening? Am I really analyzing Am I doing like Seleskovich did? When I hear that a satellite is 750 kilometers high, am I saying, oh, okay, I know that distance? It's like from Paris to Toulouse. That's the kind of analysis we do. Then we decide what to write and how to write it. Is that a weak point? Are we able to read our notes? Maybe your handwriting is really poor, like mine. Am I able to remember? Maybe not. If not, why? Perhaps I was looking at my notes too much and not really listening. How about my delivery? Is it smooth? Is it fast? Is it pleasant? It has to be. Your target language pronunciation. You know, I still come across combinations in French, which I've been speaking for 40 years, that I find just a little bit tricky to pronounce. So you never know. You might have a word that you have a hard time pronouncing. You got to practice. Like I used to do in Portugal. I'd walk down the street, look at all the signs, and I remember cabeleireiro. That word I had such a hard time saying, cabeleireiro, because there's two L's with these two diphthongs. So you got to be sort of a fanatic about it, always working on it. And then your target language word choice. Now, I set up a Google Sheet, right? You can pull this, what you see here, you can pull this up on the Facebook group. And here are some of the aspects of what you would be looking at. My vocabulary as a source language. Am I having trouble with idioms, accents? We mentioned a guy who's from India speaking English. Is my listening focused? Am I listening all the time? Or am I suspending listening sometimes because I'm thinking about my notes? You can't do that. Do I have active listening, etc.? So here we have all the criteria that we have gone through. You can pull up this spreadsheet, and you can even add to these many things that you might find are a problem according to the feedback you get while listening to your own recording, or listening to colleagues, or listening to the critique we're going to do here. So you have this thing here, and I wanted to just show this. I prepared this last night. If you look now at the Facebook group, there's a place there where you can, it says self-evaluation sheet. And so you just click on that link, which is there. And what appears is the very same sheet that we just showed you. You see, there's this tab, but there's also a second tab. This second tab, if you click there on the bottom, you see that? It'll come up like this, and that's the very same thing we were looking at. And what you can do is say, today I had a problem with listening. Tomorrow, listening, problem with listening. And when you start seeing a lot of it in one of these columns, you go, okay, now I can target my exercises to that specific skill in order to do deliberate practice on that skill, right? Is everybody following that? I want to hear a big yes. Yes, hello.
Yes, yes.
Thanks.
Yes.
Thank you. I know your mics are not all automatically on. So good. Now, we're going to take a look at how I recommend that you actually do your critique of a colleague, a little guide to critique. There's two phases. Both of you will listen to something together, like we will do here today, and all of you will take notes. And then you will hear one of your colleagues do an interpretation. So you will be listening to the interpretation. And then what I recommend is, in your own notes, in a different color from the first time you wrote, write down your comments, or circle the areas where you think you might have something to say. You should try to give the person that you're critiquing a verbatim of what they said. So don't say, well, I think you said something about the year, but I think it was off. No, say, you said 1927, but I heard, and then be ready to explain what you believe you heard. And so you could say, you said 1927, and you know that because you wrote it down. And then be ready to say what you heard, which maybe was another date. As I mentioned during class, try to listen as both a person who does not understand the originals. So try to see, would someone who really needs this interpretation understand what we just heard the interpreter say? So, but also listen as a interpreter who understands both languages, and you can say, look, I think what he said was this, and what I heard you say was that. That's for the listening part. And then when it comes to the let's see, is this, yeah, this is listening continued. Make sure that you are checking. You know, the lazy and thing that we do and what beginners do is, well, many untrained interpreters think, well, you just take the word and you find the other word. And they don't go through the process of what it actually means. And that is what gets us into trouble, saying strange things. So we are helping our colleague when we do the critique to make sure that they're using the method that we should, which I believe we should, which is always to understand what's going on. Try to always understand what's going on. So this is this part here. Check the method. Make sure that the method is being applied, that the person is speaking from actually having listened and actually having understood. So now that's part A. As you are listening to someone interpret, then you're going to go on and you're going to give your critique. I recommend it's in 3 parts. First part, you check whether the method. You tell the person, I think your method is right. You are indeed listening, and you are indeed using your notes to remind you of what you heard. You are not just writing something and repeating it because it sounds the same, etc. So the method is, you check on the person's method and you give an overall impression. And by impression, this is a little thing there. I don't know if you can hear that. Actually, I probably forgot to put, there's a button I have to put on every time. But those are the people who really love the speech. But on the right, you got a guy who's saying, well, this interpreter's pretty hesitant, pretty boring, not too sure of what he's really trying to say. So I'm going to check my phone. So again, you're checking, did the person speak from understanding? Was it a pleasant delivery? Was it a confident delivery? And was it a fast delivery? Number 2, you'll go on to content. Here you got the tree indicating the content of the speech. On the left, you got the full tree. On the right, you got a content that's missing some parts. So you're going to pick out a few parts. And remember, you're going to tell them exactly what you think was said, and you're going to tell them what they said, both. So you're going to check to make sure that the interpretation is faithful and accurate and complete. There's nothing missing, nothing is off. So that's for the content. And as you look at content, we recommend that you follow a hierarchy from important to less important. And that's what the tree represents. The trunk is the main idea. Did the person get the main idea? That major branches are the big parts there. Small branches, twigs, and then the leaves. If the person said, you know, May 29th instead of May 30th, and it was very unimportant, it was not like a date that everybody had to meet, you might consider that to be a twig or a leaf. But if the person completely missed what the speaker was trying to say and said practically the opposite, then that would be the trunk or a major branch. You try to do a bit of a diagnosis. You can do this together with your colleague if there's just 2 of you, and try to figure out, well, what did go wrong? Remember, we're all interpreters. We're all part of the same profession. We're all colleagues, and we're all trying to help each other out. So be nice. So try to help them figure out, was the method correct? Was the listening undermined by note-taking? Was there poor understanding of the source language and why, etc.? So you try to go through a diagnosis together and find out what the problem may have been, if there were any problems. And then number 3, you're going to look at the aesthetics. You're going to look at the form. You're going to look at, okay, you said a word that was a late term, but I think there's a better technical way of saying it. So we're calling this the form number 3. And this is try not to mix these all up and understand when you're talking about content and when you're talking about form. Because if you mix them, you're not going to help the person do the diagnosis necessary in order to line up what are the problem areas and to devise the right exercises to work on them. So number 3 is move to form and work as a team to find nice, accurate target language terms. So in summary, method and delivery, when you give your critique, you talk about the method and the delivery, whether it was sounded okay and whether the person was actually using the right method. Then you will go on to points of substance, going from important ones to least important ones. And then third, go on to form. Try to brainstorm together maybe to find nice ways of saying things. Are there any questions about all that? I know that it's...
This is Hilda. I have a question.
Hi, Hilda. Yeah.
My question is, when you are speaking about form,
yes,
how do you manage not to turn the discussion into a vocabulary session? Right? Let's say if you're training an interpreter, if we're having like a language exchange.
Yeah.
So let's say I'm training you in Spanish, in your delivery in Spanish, and you're training me in my delivery in English.
Okay.
And then we go into the form, and of course, I'm not a native English speaker, so I might have a poorer choice of words in English than I do in Spanish.
Right.
And when you start correcting me, I'll start taking notes of all the words that you told me were right. And then how do you prevent that from becoming a vocabulary session?
Okay, well, that's why I'm recommending this, because when you are with a partner, you wanna work on this deliberate practice of the entire process, and that's what you're mentioning, I think, is a common problem, right? We forget, we waste time when we could be actually developing our deliberate practice. We spend a lot of time on vocabulary. Is that what you're saying? And that's a problem?
But well, what I find as a problem is that instead of moving forward with the practice, perhaps there are many things that are important. I mean, if there are not like major issues in word choices, or they say like you should have said this, or you could have said this instead of that, and then we interpreters tend to stay revolving around words and words and words instead of going back to the practice. How do you manage that? Would you assign like that, leave it for the last few minutes of a practice session, or would you leave it?
I see. I would say this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3 method and delivery substance form for every interpretation. So every piece. So we're doing pieces of maybe, when we practice, maybe 4 minutes, 3 to 4 minutes as we practice. You can do longer or shorter according to what you think is more useful, but I would do this then after each of those interpretations. And I think it's just you and your partner or the teacher will say and decide and try to enforce, well, we are only going to spend the last 10% of our time each interpretation on form. So we each keep an eye and we agree on that. And the reason you agree on that is because if you are taking my method and my teaching, you can say, well, that's what David says, but I can say that, that's what I learned at AZIT, and that's what I learned from Seleskovic. One. And over the years, I sort of understood why. You can do a lot of this vocabulary work alone, although I must say, when you have that opportunity to sit down, like in the example you just said, you are a Spanish A and I'm an English A, it is a very nice opportunity to work on vocabulary. So
yes,
it depends, on your deliberate practice process. If you've noticed that everything else seems to be going very well, but for example, in the case of you and me, I noticed that my Spanish is just lacking in vocabulary. I just don't have a rich enough Spanish in my B. Then I might want to say, hey, I'd like to spend more of my time working on my Spanish. So you see what I'm saying? You would adjust it according to your needs.
Yeah, that was sort of what I wanted to get to. So let's say you can have like two people. Like if I have a mentor, or I get somebody to work with me, can I just say, okay, so what do you want to focus on?
Yes.
You want to focus on substance, and I would like to focus on form. Don't care about my substance so much, focus on my form.
Yes, and that would be what you want, because you've determined that's probably your weakest point through this process of deliberate practice, analysis, and tracking your problems, right? So it's not just what you want because you want, but you've probably determined it sort of objectively. People have been telling you, and you've been noticing that this is what you need to work on. Yes, but it would be the preference of each interpreter that would determine how much time. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure. Are there more questions on that? Okay, so we're going to move on to an actual practice session.